August 27th, 2004, the middle of a beautiful summer in Seattle. A cruise ship welcomes passengers aboard. For 40-year-old Marion Carver is all about personal time. She plans to spend the next 7 days enjoying her solitude and writing poetry. But unfortunately, she is not left alone for long. The morning of August 29, 2004, Marion Carver disappears from the ship in the middle of the high seas. Neither the ship's crew nor her family know where she is. What clues exist to solve her disappearance? Marion Carver, a former investment banker from Cambridge, Massachusetts, who loves writing poetry and traveling.
Marion was a stunning redhead who was an overachiever, but sensitive person. She was into poetry, wrote poetry, but she was a traveler and into adventures, did extensive traveling.
Marion is divorced and lives by herself in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Her 13-year-old daughter is in England, spending the summer with her dad, Marion's ex-husband. Marion's daughter is in regular touch with her, talking at least once a day to know how her mother's doing. But little do they know that this is the last time they'll talk. Marion leaves her apartment without telling anyone in her family. Marion leaves to get on a plane, but no one knows where she's going.
Since she lives alone and she was traveling without any companions, it was more of a risk that she didn't tell anyone that she was going on this trip, that she'd be gone, where she was going. She didn't even have anyone watching her house, which is a bit strange for someone who lives on their own. It's almost like it was a split-second decision on her part. She found the cruise. She decided she had the time, she wanted to go, and she just left. When you're living alone, you are just dependent on yourself. You only have to think about yourself when it comes to logistics like going on a trip. Maybe she was afraid that if she told someone, they would have tried to talk her out of going.
As she gets on a plane from Boston, she seems to be preparing for an onward journey. The plane lands in Seattle. There, she boards a cruise liner. Leaving to Alaska, Marion boards the 866-foot-long, 12-deck, 2,000-passenger capacity ship. This is the second time she is getting on this cruise.
Marion was a very private person. She was 40 years old, but she was a traveler and she enjoyed that.
Marion had been on that cruise once before with her daughter, so she had some familiarity and some experience on that specific cruise line. She was on the 9th floor of the ship, and this was on a panoramic deck level. All of the windows had panoramic views of the ocean, so it was quite spectacular.
You're going to find as your kids get older, they become more private. But her taking eventually we determined took a cruise, we weren't surprised at that. She enjoyed that, and so that was something she enjoyed doing.
Marion's first night on the cruise is everything she wanted and more. She spends time relaxing.
People who live alone don't necessarily have their friends and family around them all the time watching their back. So their level of personal security is different from someone who lives in and amongst a group of people.
Marion avoids contact with strangers, but others make contact with her, whether she likes it or not.
Usually, most crimes are occurred by someone that knows us, someone that's close to us. This is why cops always look at the spouse first. But there is the type of crime where it's a stranger, they just happen to see this person, and for whatever reason, whether it's money, jealousy, some sort of criminal urge, they decide to take that person's life.
She seeks peace and quiet on the opposite side of the deck, where it's less busy.
As much as we'd like to be able to travel alone, when you're a woman traveling alone, it can make you more appealing to certain types of predators, and it can open the door for these crimes of opportunity to happen. Being a writer, Marion probably had a higher level of intuition than your average Joe. So it wouldn't be unusual for her to maybe have gotten a feeling that there was something wrong, something off about people, or just this feeling that maybe she wasn't entirely safe, and that could have led to her pulling back even more.
She attempts to refocus her mind and spends time writing in her cabin.
Cruise ships are an environment where people can go and relax and let go. There's a lot of alcohol on board, there's lots of entertainment, there are things to do. People just go and have a good time and forget about everything going on at home for a little while.
Marion plans to retire to bed early, but she gets a visitor. It's the ship's steward, also known as a porter. He delivers towels, which she requested earlier that evening.
Cruise ships take great care in determining what people can bring on board with them, whether it be at their home port or at ports of call. So the alcohol in the ship is provided by the ship. Passengers aren't allowed to bring their own alcohol aboard. Staff on the cruise ships, the bartenders, the waiters, are very careful to try to limit overservice to their passengers. We don't want people to get out of hand. It's a very small environment relatively, and people are in close proximity. So when there's a lot of alcohol flowing, people lose their inhibitions, they act differently, and there's a lot more chance that things can get out of hand.
The cruise ship doors lock electronically, but they don't have any safety latches or deadbolts to keep them shut. Marion is a little worried when she can't find a way to lock the door manually.
Alcohol can be a powder keg in these situations where you have lots of different people coming from lots of different backgrounds. They don't know each other. It's lowering the inhibitions of some people. So it can lead to violence, it can lead to fights, it can lead to all sorts of things. It's not necessarily always just a good time.
A worried Marion tries to put herself to sleep.
The staff aboard a cruise ship have access to virtually the entire ship. They have access to passenger cabins. They have access to luggage compartments. It's imperative that they do a good job in determining that their crew don't have criminal backgrounds.
She'd done extensive cruises with her daughter. This one, we're not sure whether she was with somebody or not, the way the thing unfolded. But it wasn't a surprise that she was on a cruise.
Marion Carver is a former investment banker who lives in Cambridge, Massachusetts by herself. Marion leaves her Cambridge apartment on the morning of August 26, 2004. She decides to get on a cruise alone without informing any of her loved ones. She is enjoying people watching, but tries to keep to herself while she's on the ship. She retires to bed early on in the evening, but will she be left alone? With no cell phone service on the ship, Marion is unaware of her daughter trying to reach her. Neither Marion's parents nor her daughter know where she is. After a day of staying on the ship and interacting with a few strangers, Marion is still a little wary. Marion spends the day writing and walking the ship.
She was in the poetry, wrote poetry. She was a traveler and into adventures. Marion was a fairly serious person.
She's trying to have as little interaction as possible with crew or other passengers.
Crew is trained to keep an eye out for strange behavior, anything that may be problematic for them or dangerous.
Like any workplace, there's rules on cruise ship about the staff getting a bit too friendly with the passengers. They're supposed to keep a professional distance. And this is for a reason. It can get really awkward if there's a romantic fling gone wrong on a cruise ship and there's romantic complications between the passengers and the crew. So cruise ships, like any other working environment, like to keep things professional. A ship's crew is pretty well trained to notice what their guests want and what they don't want. So even if you never meet them or you don't strike up much of a conversation, just by what your habits are, how you leave your room, it can tell them certain things about you so that they're able to serve you better. In this case, it would be obvious for them to tell whether or not you're alone based on how your room looks, what you order for room service, for example.
Cruise ships are enormous vessels, and when you want to get away from it all, there are always ways to find a quiet spot out of the view of other people where you can just have some time to yourself. It's not hard to get lost if you want to on a cruise ship.
Marion tries to take a nap in her cabin while the party deck starts picking up activity. Marion decides to stay in her room and read instead of going to the first formal dinner.
On the evening of the second day, which was a Saturday, sometime between 8 and 8:30 is when the cabin attendant, he went into her cabin. And the reason that he chose that time is because it was the night of the first formal. They're very popular events, and most of the passengers attend. He apologized for interrupting and wondered if she was planning to go to the formal. And apparently Marion told him that she was not planning to attend the formal. But apparently Marion asked if he would help her order some room service. He came in and took her order.
Ship stewards are there to make their passengers happy, basically. They're a combination of a waiter and a concierge rolled into one. They're there to make sure that your experience on board is the best possible.
I don't quite understand the significance of the room service order, the 2 sandwiches, not one, but 2 sandwiches. So she's not attending the formal. She orders a couple of sandwiches and she's reading. Now maybe she was very hungry, maybe she hadn't eaten all day and she ordered 2 sandwiches for herself. But you have to wonder, did she plan to have some company?
Seeing the cabin steward's courteous and docile demeanor, Marion offers him a tip. He smiles and refuses. He says it's his job to serve her. Marion can hear the loud music from the ship's deck percolating through her door. She finishes her food and places her dishes outside the door. Before going to sleep, she sets some money aside for the steward. She slips into her bed, getting ready to sleep. She plans to give it to him in the morning. But will she see him again? Marion Carver is aboard a cruise ship trying to get some solitude, but is unable to avoid interactions. The cabin porter is curious to know if Marion needs anything. The cabin porter is addressed by his supervisor to only attend to guests when called upon. Marion decides to head back to her cabin. Her cabin steward enters her room and is surprised to find her there. He apologizes and asks if she is planning on attending the formal. She tells him she is not and asks him to order some food from room service instead. Her courteous steward brings her 2 sandwiches that she requested. She offers him a tip, but he refuses. After finishing the food, Marion places her dishes outside the door. She sets some money aside for the steward for when she sees him next.
The cabin attendant had contact with Marion in her room sometime between 8 and 8:30 that Saturday evening. And the following morning, he returned and Marion was no longer in her cabin. And he cleaned up the dishes, had no contact with her that morning.
Even though it's not talked about that often, that a lot of people go missing on cruise ships. Now, whether this is of their own volition, they decided to take their own life, or it's an accident, they slipped and fell, or someone decided to throw them overboard, it is something that happens with more regularity than a lot of people would like to admit.
The cabin steward searches the ship for her, but is unable to find her. After searching almost every possible space, he's a bit anxious. Baffled, he barges into his supervisor's quarters to inform him about the incident.
So when she was reported missing to a supervisor, the supervisor seemed to have a very casual attitude towards this person potentially being missing. There are very specific procedures that they need to follow to ensure that an investigation is started as quickly as possible. If somebody goes missing on a cruise ship, a vast amount of space can be covered before anybody notices they're missing. So the sooner procedures are put in place, the better it is to determine what happened to that person.
The cabin steward has searched the whole ship a couple times by now. He's getting anxious, knowing that he can't find Marion. He starts asking other stewards if they've seen her this morning.
Thankfully, the steward does seem to be really concerned about Marion. He's noticed her movements, he's gotten to know her better than anyone else on board, and he knows that there's something wrong. People always pay close attention to the reaction when someone first goes missing. This can be very telling. In this case, there could be legitimate reasons for the steward to seem concerned.
The supervisor inexplicably calls the cabin stewards into his office. The supervisor hands out an official document for the stewards to sign.
When a supervisor asks staff to sign non-disclosure agreements about a person going missing, alarm bells would be raised to me. It's more like the supervisor is more concerned with covering their own behind than actually trying to find out what happened to this person. They've realized that they've done something wrong in not investigating it, and now they're trying to cover themselves.
We got emails, internal emails, showing the process of covering up Marion's disappearance. That was critical.
Marion's daughter hasn't spoken with her mom in a week now. Worried, she calls her grandparents to investigate.
Her daughter called us because she couldn't get Marion on the phone. And her daughter at that point was in London. So I really didn't suspect any problem. So we started calling Marion.
Ken Carver reassures his granddaughter and tells her he'll investigate. Ken calls Marion's cell phone. It gets a busy tone. Then he calls her apartment's landline phone a few times, but no one answers.
Anyway, we went to the Cambridge police and said, would you go by her apartment in Cambridge just to check out?
The worried Carvers file a missing persons report with the Cambridge police. The Cambridge police are prompt to investigate the report. They reach Marion's apartment and look for any signs of a break-in.
So the Cambridge police went over, went in, the apartment was there, nothing was missing, except her daughter, Marion.
The police officers don't find anything out of the ordinary inside her apartment. They seize the laptop and a few other things for further investigation. Officers question Marion's neighbors about whether they've seen her, but no one knows of her whereabouts. Back at the police station, the officers are trying to access the information from Marion's laptop, but they're not having any success. Back on the ship, not much has changed. The claims manager and hotel operations manager meet with the porter's supervisor. The cabin steward thinks of going up to the claims manager and telling her what happened.
So when a witness sees something occur and they report it because they believe what happened was wrong, and then their concerns are disregarded, that can be very difficult for a witness to understand. They believe this should have been investigated, and it wasn't.
For one last time, the cabin steward checks Marion's cabin.
So the cabin attendant returned again that evening. The room was in the exact same condition. Nothing had changed.
In the morning hours of August 29, 2004, Marion Carver's steward discovers she's missing from her cabin. He tries to check various places where a passenger could possibly be. Not finding her anywhere, baffled, he barges into his supervisor's quarters to inform him about the incident. Marion's daughter is stressed as she hasn't spoken to her in a week. Panicked, she calls Marion's father, Ken Carver. A worried Ken Carver files a missing persons report with the Cambridge, Massachusetts police after several tries to reach her. Neither her parents nor her 13-year-old daughter know where she is. The claims manager and hotel operations manager meet with the porter's supervisor. A disappointed cabin steward is still looking for Marion. It's been a couple of days since Marion's disappearance. Her steward goes to his supervisor again to inform him that she's not in her room.
Of the steward, he did know something. He had reported Marion missing daily after about the second day on the trip to his supervisor. And his supervisor said, just forget it and do your job.
He's told to leave. The supervisor tells him, just do your job and leave it to me. The cabin steward is doing as he was told. He makes Marion's bed and leaves chocolate and flowers on her pillow. He's concerned about Marion and wants to know what happened to her. He starts looking for clues and theorizing what must have taken place.
She was on the 9th floor of the ship. You could go 2 floors up, come out the elevator, be right on the deck, and the edge of the ship is right there. You could easily disappear over the side of the ship. And if you took the elevator from the 9th floor down to the 6th floor, which was the next closest deck, it was equally easy to make your way to the deck from the elevator and disappear over the edge without being noticed. If it happened early morning hours when nobody was on deck, it could very easily happen with no one seeing it.
Marion's parents are looking exhausted. It's been 3 weeks since their daughter's disappearance. They've asked the FBI to intervene and made many phone calls to the Cambridge Police Department, but to no relief. More than anyone else, Marion's daughter is not able to deal with the fact that her mother can't be found.
The police rely on other agencies to provide them information when they request it, such as in this case where we can establish where she was by going through her bank records or by obtaining her bank records.
So that in turn started a search by the Cambridge police. And they were able to determine, they were able to get into her accounts and determine that she'd bought a ticket for a cruise out of Alaska. They called me and said, hey, we've got a ticket here for an Alaska cruise.
Ken decides to get in touch with the cruise company to find out more.
I called the cruise line and said, gee, was their daughter on your cruise ship? And they got back and said, well, she was on the cruise, but we don't know whether or not she got off.
Ken hangs up the phone, but still has his doubts. He can sense something's wrong. Ken decides to pass this information to the FBI.
Cruise ships are like airplanes, and we all know when we travel through an airport, you don't get on a plane with proper identification and a ticket. This is no different. She got on the ship, presented a ticket, would have had to present identification. They would track the fact that she's on the ship and when she gets off the ship, so they would know that this person is on their cruise ship.
So the first question we asked, was there any video of Marion on the cruise? And they came back and said, no, there's no video. And in 3 weeks, it would have been erased. So there was no video of Marion.
Cruise ships don't have their own police forces on board. They have staff that act as security people. They have specific security roles, to determine when people come on and off the ship and people that are responsible for watching out what goes on. But they don't necessarily have a police force on the ship.
Ken Carver is trying to find out what happened to his 40-year-old daughter. Did she commit suicide? Did she fall overboard? Or did someone kill her? Ken calls Brian Brandley, the Cambridge detective assigned to Marion's case.
As a parent, when your child goes missing, the thing you want more than anything is some sort of answer. You want to know what happened to them, where it happened, how it happened. You just want some sort of answers. You want some sort of closure.
He had confirmed Marion was aboard the ship, but he is not able to offer much help. As the Cambridge police and FBI don't have jurisdiction on cruise ships, Ken decides to hire a private investigator, Tim Schmolder.
It's completely understandable that Marion's dad wouldn't want to give up, that he'd be driven to hire a private investigator to try and find out more.
Hiring a private investigator is the only choice left for Ken. He wants answers that the police and FBI can't provide.
She was aboard the vessel unbeknownst to her family, and so they didn't really have a lot of information, but apparently they had determined that she disappeared.
Tim is finally able to get aboard the ship and is able to meet only with the claims manager.
The main person that I was hoping to speak with was the cabin attendant. I was told that the cabin attendant wasn't available and was already on rotation aboard another vessel. I was also informed that the hotel manager, the cabin attendant's supervisor, was also unavailable. At some point, the guest claims representative even informed me that it really wasn't necessary to talk to anyone else because she had all the relevant information. Surely she couldn't think that she was the only person who had any relevant information in regards to a party that has gone missing aboard the ship. That just seemed kind of an outrageous statement to make. Basically felt as though I had to talk my way on board. The Carver family was looking for answers. They were really trying to discourage me from deciding to board the vessel by making it clear that some of the reasons that I was hoping to clarify wouldn't be made available to me.
In his investigation, he finds out that even though Marion's room is on the panorama deck, the windows are latched and bolted. He asks Katie if he can review the security footage from those cameras, and he's told that they delete it every 2 weeks. Then he asks if he can speak with the security officer, but he's denied that privilege as the ship is undergoing employee training.
I was well prepared to see how plausible it was that Marion may have committed suicide, may have met with foul play, may have planned her own disappearance.
Marion Carver's steward was persistent in reporting that Marion was missing, but the supervisor doesn't pay heed to his request. Cambridge police informs Ken Carver they discovered that Marion had taken a flight to Seattle to take a cruise to Alaska. Ken decides to get in touch with the cruise company. They inform him that Marion did get on the cruise, but they don't know if she got off. Feeling helpless with how the FBI and the police are handling this case, Ken decides to hire a private investigator. After 2 months of phone calls and emails, Tim is finally able to get on the cruise ship.
Basically felt as though I had to talk my way on board. The Carver family was looking for answers.
Tim leaves the ship with more questions than answers. An angry Ken Carver decides to force some answers and hires lawyers from Massachusetts and Florida. The lawyers put in months of hard work, and they get subpoenas for crew members. They make the cruise line comply to any and all requests.
That we wanted to speak to somebody on that ship that had seen her daughter. Well, the logical place to start was the porter that took care of her room.
2 cruise line employees testify in a telephone deposition. For the first time, the Carvers hear that cruise members were actually aware, even concerned about Marion's disappearance, yet they did nothing about it. Marion's cabin steward describes meeting her on the first day of the cruise and notices she was missing 2 days later. He reports this to his supervisor repeatedly, but is told to do his job. The steward notices $107 has been left on the dresser under his name card. He says he doesn't take the money. He simply makes up the bed and places the day's program on the coverlet and leaves the room. That night, he finds the room unchanged, money on the dresser, program on the bed. He turns down the bed as required and leaves a chocolate in colored tinfoil on the pillow. The next morning, the chocolate and money remain undisturbed, and he again reports Marion's absence to his supervisor. He says the last time he's seen Marion was on the second night of the cruise, when he brought her 2 sandwiches from room service. He also said she did not appear sad, upset, angry, or in any way out of sorts. The steward further tells on the last day of the cruise, Marion's clothes and belongings were right where she had left them.
And the steward comes in to the supervisor, said, "What do I do with the stuff in the room? It's all still there." And the supervisor's answer was, put it in a bag and put it in my locker, for which they disposed of. Didn't notify anybody. They disposed of her stuff at that point.
Very often investigators are led a certain direction fairly quickly into an investigation. In this particular case, there seems to be a roadblock at every turn. Information is not clear as to who a suspect might be, and it's frustrating as an investigator.
The captain, the staff captain, and the hotel director had access to keys to all the rooms that would allow them to enter Marion's room in an emergency. And when you have those three high-level layers of people having access to keys, it's possible that there may be others that may, through them, have access to keys.
The Carvers are drained. They can't believe the cruise line would just pack up their daughter's belongings and say nothing about her disappearance. The second deposition comes from the manager of hotel operations on the ship. Although ship officials had not acted on Marion's disappearance, the manager of hotel operations testifies that the company had begun its own internal investigation and had fired the steward supervisor for failing to report Marion's absence. The investigation had begun at the end of September, after Brandley, the Cambridge detective, had contacted the cruise line. Despite the detective's request, no police report was ever filed. Instead, about 5 weeks after Marion's disappearance, the cruise line filed a missing persons report with the FBI. The manager of hotel operations says the steward supervisor was fired for poor performance. He called it a case of bad judgment.
One thing that's really strange about this case is instead of holding the belongings for the family, which would normally happen, they packed them up, they hid them away in a locker, and then donated them. It's so strange that they would do that they wouldn't at least give the family her belongings.
To the Carvers, it appears the cruise line was cleaning house. They wonder what other pieces of the puzzle might have been swept away. Ken Carver decides to write to the cruise line's chairman and board of directors. He wants answers. He wants closure. A month later, he receives a copy of the security report. The September 30th report from the manager of the fleet security noted that company regulations had been violated. It said the ship's captain, the bridge and security office should have been notified the moment Marion disappeared. The report also suggests Marion's belongings should not have been moved. Evidence found at the scene of an incident must be left where found. The report says the ship's security staff must secure the scene and maintain the integrity of the incident scene, ensuring nothing is touched or tampered with until outside investigators arrive on board. The Carvers decide it's time to remember Marion, but they don't call it a memorial service. Ken Carver moves Marion's belongings out of her apartment. Most of her possessions are given to charity. Only a few personal items are kept by the Carvers. Looking at Marion's personal belongings and rethinking over the information he received, Ken doesn't know what to believe, even now.
If you read their corporate statement, it says, well, we don't lie, we give only truthful information. It's a bunch of baloney.
Ken Carver keeps the search of his daughter alive by regularly calling and emailing the Coast Guard, the police, and the FBI.
Almost daily contact. And plus we had a law firm in Massachusetts that was working on it. So the combination of the two.
Ken Carver sues the cruise line for being irresponsible and negligent. In August 2005, the legal battle between the Carvers and the cruise line goes public. The company issues a statement that stuns the Carvers. The cruise line declares Marion dead.
And when I first contacted them, they said, you know, we've reviewed the videos. We see Marion jumped overboard. We're sorry. That would have ended it.
The letter from the cruise line says, quote, Mrs. Carver had severe emotional problems, had attempted suicide before, and appears to have committed suicide on our ship. The death of Marion Carver is a horrible tragedy, but regrettably, there is very little a cruise line, a resort, or a hotel can do to prevent someone from committing suicide.
Well, that's the standard response. You know, if they knew it was a suicide, then show us that it was a suicide. Give us the evidence. But that's the standard thing. Guy must have committed suicide. He's gone missing on a cruise ship. That's their standard response.
The ship's explanation for what happened to Marion just doesn't make sense to Ken. Why would she go on this wonderful cruise just to kill herself? She was so excited about her writing. She had lots to look forward to. She had a great life. It just doesn't fit his daughter as far as Ken knows her.
I guess anybody can commit suicide at some point. But the answer is, there was nothing in your life that said Marion's going to commit suicide.
For the Carvers, the statement is the ultimate blow. Having spent all this time trying to find his daughter, he now knows it's time to channel his energies to fight a bigger fight.
The worst thing that could possibly happen to a parent is having their child go missing and never getting any closure, never finding out what happened to them. Even though it's horrible to lose a child in any way, if you have a body, at least that supplies some closure so people can try to put the pieces back together. But without that, without any answers at all, it's just this living nightmare they can't wake up from.
And after that testimony, we just sat in the audience. I decided, hey, there's a problem with this industry. What happened to us is happening all the time. So we got 4 families together. They were at that hearing, and we formed a little group called International Cruise Victims. So that launched this little group, which here we are in 2019, to try and correct corporations that decide to operate outside the law and not take appropriate action when crimes occur.